For most of my life, I felt broken. It showed up in my relationships, my work, and the way I spoke to myself. No matter how much I achieved, I still felt unworthy, unseen, and alone. But everything changed when I started healing my inner child. I found peace where there used to be chaos, built friendships that actually felt safe, and created a life that feels like me again. I'm Nicole Polidano, a foster mom and inner child healing coach, and this is Heal Out Loud. Each week, we'll blend science, soul, and real talk to help you stop feeling broken and start becoming the person you've always needed. Because healing isn't quiet, it's time to heal out loud. Hello, and welcome back. This is episode 10 on Heal Out Loud, and today we have a very special guest with us, and this is a guest whom I love dearly. A guest I say thanks to every single day of my life because of the work we've done together. And today we have Anthea Spiteri, who's a somatic therapist and a self-worth coach. Hello, Anthea.
Hello, Nicole. I'm super happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm really excited for our conversation. I'm sure it's going to be great.
Me too. We're so happy to have you here. Genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for accepting the invitation. Anthea, as a means of introduction for people that don't know you, can you explain a bit like what you do, your work?
100%. So I am a somatic therapist, but I've been coaching women with their self-worth for the last 6 years. And when I say somatic therapist, it's because when it comes to healing, and in this case, working with anxious attachment, which we'll be talking about today, we heal through the means of our body, because that is where most of our emotions are coming through and also where trauma is stored. Our body is literally holding memories in the cells. So therefore, when we are trying to heal anxious attachment, it is very important that we also use the body as a way to get there instead of just staying in our head.
We've been on a whole journey together of inner child healing, and definitely there was a moment where I knew I had to take my healing a step further, and thanks to you and your somatic occupation, we've been doing this, and it's amazing the results that you see. So today on episode 10, we're going to be talking about how insecure attachment shows up in relationship and how our childhood experiences, wounds, and traumas cause these attachments. So, Auntie, I'm going to start asking you some questions. For those who are brand new to this, how would you describe anxious attachment in the simplest way possible?
Okay, so some of you may already be aware that you are anxiously attached. Some of you may have never even heard of this term, but either way, when we are anxiously attached, basically we feel mostly insecure in relationships. Now, this can come up in all aspects of relationships, even friendships, work-related, family, but oftentimes where we see it the most is in romantic relationships. And the way this usually shows up is when you are feeling, if I'm going to really boil it down, is when you are feeling like you are not good enough, that there is maybe something wrong with you, you are easily replaceable for your partner, and that you are scared of not being worthy enough. So how does this usually show up in day-to-day life? You find it easily maybe to compare yourself to other women and be scared that your partner will want someone else instead of you. Now we can find many reasons why. Maybe it's because of how you look, maybe it's because of your character, maybe it's because of your past or because of your career, whatever we're linking our words to, we tend to use it against ourselves, especially when we're anxiously attached in romantic relationships. Now, this could also look like overthinking. For example, if you didn't reply in a certain time frame, you tend to start maybe obsessing or overthinking, scrolling on your phone, refreshing your chat, or seeing when he was online last, for example. So it's almost like you are constantly scared of rejection in your relationships, or maybe even dating, because you might be in a relationship, in a marriage, or even in the beginnings of dating, right? And you're constantly waiting for rejection to happen, both when it's actually happening, you take it a lot to heart, or when it's not even happening, you are constantly waiting for it to happen. So you're constantly almost living in the state of rejection, even when you're not really experiencing it in real life.
100% true. And now that we're talking about anxious attachment, Antea, are there any other insecure attachments that also Like, of course, we know that there's secure attachment and there's insecure attachment. So anxious attachment is one of them, right?
Yeah. 100%. So as you're saying, there are different, so it's like insecure attachment is more of an umbrella term, and there are a lot of other attachment styles that come underneath that. So of course, to be secure is when you feel safe in relationships. And of course, this will be impacted by the partner you're with. So it's not just it's being in your head. If you're with someone that is toxic or unhealthy, of course, then that is going to play a big part of you feeling unsafe in the relationship. But if you find yourself, especially in patterns with different people, having the same fears and insecurities coming up, even if you have people that are not bringing it out of you, especially they're not doing anything wrong, quote unquote, to bring that out, then most probably you would have an insecure attachment style. When you're secure, you would feel mostly comfortable being vulnerable and having intimacy and getting close to someone, and you're not constantly doing things with the fear of getting rejected or losing the person. So that anxiety usually comes from that fear. So when you're more secure, let's start with secure because it's the easiest one to work with in a way to explain. When you are securely attached, you feel both the openness to experience love and intimacy and closeness, but also having enough sense of self and sense of self-worth that you're not making this person your entire world. You know that I would love to have you in my life. You are very important to me, but also I'm going to be okay if you're not there. I have enough self-worth to know that I can carry my own too. So it's this mixture of this inner strength, but also softness to help open up to have intimacy in the first place. Now, with other insecure attachment, I like to go a little bit deeper than just how you can learn online what attachment style you are, because usually attachment styles, the way I see it, is that you can see the behavior, right? The behavior, if you are maybe anxious, if you're anxious in relationships, if you find yourself avoiding intimacy and closeness, most probably you're more avoidant. And I'll explain all of these, by the way. I'm just skimming through them. But underneath it all, insecure attachment is insecure attachment. And underneath all of these behaviors that we have, whether you're anxious of losing someone, whether you're scared of getting close to someone, deep down, it all comes from the same place, which is fear of abandonment, fear of being left. So some of us feel safer, and this can change, right? You might feel anxiously attached in certain periods of your life, and then in maybe in another relationship or another period of your life you become more avoidantly attached, for example. And there's the mixture of both, which I will explain. Underneath it all, at the end of the day, it is the fear of being abandoned. So if you're anxiously attached, you're going to hold on tightly, you're going to cling, you're going to be needy, you're going to ask for reassurance, you're not going to feel safe, and no amount of reassurance usually creates the safety, because you're scared to lose that person, because you have put, or like they say, you've put all of your eggs in this person's basket. But it doesn't mean that it's because if you don't, you would date other people. What I mean by this, it's you're putting your worth, you're putting your happiness, you're putting your sense of safety and stability into this person. So for you, if this person doesn't love me the way I need to be loved, doesn't approve of me, then I'm not safe. There's something wrong. My self-worth won't be here. I will feel completely lost and completely shattered. Now, if you are more of the opposite, which is the avoidant attachment, it's still coming from the fear of abandonment, but usually when a person is avoidantly attached, they just find other ways to feel safe. Instead of clinging on because they're scared to lose the person, they're scared to lose the person, so therefore they never allow themselves to get close in the first place. So it's still coming from the same insecurity deep down. It's just a different way that it shows up behavior-wise, right? And as I've said, sometimes it could be that you find yourself maybe being more anxiously attached, and in other times you find yourself being more avoidantly attached, right? So it's not that you're like this forever, but underneath it all, it's always going to be insecure attachment. So anxious attachment, I've already explained what it is. Avoidant attachment is when we have this almost like fear that to lose yourself in the relationship, right? Or if I'm let someone close to me, I will get hurt. So therefore, I will never let people come close to me. So this fear around it would be fear of being controlled, fear of feeling. Usually when someone is avoidantly attached, you easily feel suffocated, or like you're scared of losing your freedom or losing your independence, or scared to be judged. So there usually is this push-pull dynamic, right? Emotional distance. And I prefer to be by myself as a way to create this armor and protect myself. This could be, maybe you've experienced it yourself if you're listening, or maybe you've experienced it from another person. Maybe, and the way this shows up usually when someone is avoidantly attached, they take more space. When they get close, they tend to freak out and take space again. This person would avoid talking about anything deep or that involves lots of emotions. If you get emotional in front of someone who is avoidantly attached, most likely they will get uncomfortable, because again, they feel uncomfortable even with their own emotions. They don't like to experience intimacy, because for them it's linked to danger. Something bad will happen if someone gets close, right? And usually they struggle also with communication as well, and they shut down in conflict. So when you see someone who's anxiously attached, right, and someone who's anxiously attached, is sort of like the wound is, unless someone chooses me, I'm not safe. The fear of losing a person, being replaced, abandonment. So this person is hyper focusing on the relationship, having more emotional spirals, needing reassurance. Sometimes we overgive from this place as well. And when you have these two together, which oftentimes they attract each other, you'll have this push-pull dynamic, because what tends to happen is that there's this person who craves the closeness and it feels like it's never enough, because again, it's coming from a wound, and the other person who is scared of the closeness. So they bring out each other's insecurities oftentimes, where the person who is scared of losing another person or is scared of being abandoned and being rejected, and oftentimes needs that closeness and reassurance, when the other person is pulling away because they feel like it's too much, they feel suffocated, the avoidantly attached especially, they feel suffocated, that triggers the anxiety even more from the anxious attachment and anxiously attached person. And vice versa, because someone who's anxiously attached will want to be close constantly to feel safe. That triggers the avoidantly attached, because then they feel like it's too much for them and they need space. And the space triggers, it keeps on going back and forth. So
Tom and Jerry.
anxiety, 100%. The anxiety brings out the avoidance, and the avoidance brings out the anxiety, basically. And then there is the disorganized, which is fearful avoidant, which is a mixture of both in a way. And usually this person has a fear of closeness. So for them, love is dangerous, getting close is dangerous, but then also fears being alone. So they have this mixture of both. So they fear both abandonment and also closeness. So usually what comes up to these people that have a bit of a mixture of both at the same time is more chaotic relationships, intense emotions, craving connection, but then as soon as they get it, they sabotage it, they push it away. So it's almost like they panic if the other person is not reassuring them, for example, but then as soon as the other person is fully showing up, they shut down, they feel like it's too close, they panic. So it's almost like a mixture of both of these together. And then there's a lot more. Avoidance, for example, there's dismissive avoidance, there's fearful avoidant. So there are ways how this can show up. But again, I like to simplify, because these are all the behaviors, right? Underneath it all, it's still all the fear of abandonment, the fear of rejection, and we're just reacting to it in a different way. So that is why when doing my work, and you know this, it's important that we go deep enough to work with the root cause and not just the behavior, because the behavior, again, maybe I stop being anxious, but then I become more avoidant or fearful avoidant, and you might just experience one, but the behavior itself is not enough. We need to tackle the fear and the wound and potentially even the trauma underneath it all.
I agree with you fully, especially when you were mentioning, there are 2 points I want to speak on and open further. Firstly, when you were saying that sometimes you can be anxious, sometimes you can be avoidant, sometimes you can be fearful avoidant. And it's so true, because it's like we have this insecure attachment, and then there's like these different, like the spectrum of insecure attachment, and then we shift between one or another. I used to think, because in my first long-term relationship, towards the end, I I became more anxious, but I agree with you 100% on what you're saying, because there were relationships where I was anxiously attached and there were relationships where I was avoidantly attached. And then there was a relationship where I was avoidant, anxious, fearful, like all these, a mixture. And it becomes so difficult to understand what's happening in the body, in your brain. You're like, okay, so there's one moment I want them close. As soon as they're close, I don't want them. And it's the same dynamic with them. So it gets very confusing, very exhausting. And sometimes I believe that unless we regulate our nervous system, unless we work with the body and with the mind, we keep on choosing a familiar hell rather than like a new heaven. Because if our body is used to this push-pull dynamic, that's what we're gonna keep on chasing after. So that was one thing I wanted to mention. And another
May I
thing
jump in on that for a
of course,
second? Because we chase it, right? We even find partners that most probably will bring that out more of us, but we are also co-creating it, because sometimes we can even have someone who's not insecurely attached, for example, who's more secure, but then our behavior, if we're still showing up from a place of insecure attachment, that can still bring out the same dynamic and pattern. So it's important that we take responsibility, not all of the responsibility, because it takes two to tango, right? But to recognize where we are playing a part in it as well, and where we are chasing it and also co-creating it at the same time. Because when we recognize that, that can start leading us to freedom, because then we can work on our side of the street. We can't work on both sides because relationship takes two people, and we can't do the work for the other person, but at least we can do the work for our side.
I'm so glad that you're mentioning this, because something I've noticed is, and it's going to be the next question, but when there's this, because unfortunately, anxiously attached people, and again, as we said earlier, it's insecure, but sometimes we tend to lean more towards the anxious or tend to lean more towards the avoidant. And usually those that tend more towards the anxious side, and then those that tend to lean more towards the avoidant side, they attract each other. And something that I see with my clients, friends, and people that I speak to, and I'm sure you see this as well, Anthea, since the anxious and the avoidant in the relationship during the breakup, they react so differently. So, okay, they both fear abandonment, they both fear rejection. We agree on that. But since they both react so differently in the relationship, in the breakup, the anxious person tends to, and of course not everyone, but I see this happening a lot, the anxious person tends to play the victim card, not because they want to, but because they actually believe that they're victims. So I want this podcast, I'm sure you're going to get a lot out of this episode for whoever is listening, but one main theme I want you to get out of this is to, as Anthea said, to start being responsible, to start realizing that we're co-creating this, not just, because the avoidant did this to me, the avoidant did that. It's this toxic dance between the avoidant and the anxious. It's a trauma bond, most oftentimes than not. So my next question was going to be, Anthea, why? Why is it that the anxious and the avoidant attract each other so much? And if an anxious person is listening to us right now, can you please explain to them why the avoidant acts so differently to them, and not because they're mean and not because the anxious person doesn't mean anything to that person? Thank you.
100%. Thank you for sharing that, and I completely agree with you. It's like it's very important that we recognize maybe when we have been victims in our lives, but this doesn't mean that we stay in victimhood, right? Because it doesn't serve you to feel constantly like you're a victim. It usually keeps you trapped more in the pain and the wound, even in the trauma potentially. So completely agree with what you've shared there. And why do people that are anxiously attached attract more someone who is avoidant, right? It's almost like the polar opposite in a way. So if I am, and I used to be anxiously attached, there were some cases as well where I was also avoidantly attached, but for the majority I've been anxiously attached and scared to be rejected, abandoned, not good enough, and all of these things. So I will speak from my experience as well. So when I am anxiously attached, right, when I am already believing that I am not good enough, that someone else needs to complete me, that there's something wrong with me, I am going to find people that will prove that that is true. So most probably someone that is going to make me feel safe is not going to be as aligned with me if I am already showing up from a place of disorganized attachment or insecure attachment. That's the word I was looking for, not disorganized. If I am showing up from a place of insecure attachment, I am most likely going to attract someone that is also showing up in an insecure attachment, but then most probably I'll be attracted to someone that is confirming to me that what I believe about myself is true. Most likely, I'm not going to attract someone who's also anxiously attached, even though they're both insecure, because someone who's anxiously attached most probably is going to want a lot from me and is going to want to get close to me. And someone who is avoidant has this dynamic of risk of danger in a way, risk of being rejected. So usually when you're anxiously attached, you're going to be pulled more towards that because that's familiar to your system. And this doesn't come out of thin air, right? This comes usually from our experiences in childhood, potentially even trauma, throughout our childhood, throughout our adulthood, even in relationships, even during birth or pre-birth. So there's a lot that goes on with your forming your attachment style. Usually we form our attachment in the first 2 years of our life and before that. So during birth or pre-birth. And of course, then life experiences after that, especially throughout childhood, will play a big impact on this. But if I, for example, had a history of growing up with maybe family members or siblings or even the people I experienced in school, for example, where I didn't feel loved, they didn't feel chosen, didn't feel safe, that is going to be what is familiar to my body, to my system. So I will seek that without realizing subconsciously. So I'm not going to be walking around, who's going to reject me? Let me pick that person. You're not even going to think about it. There would be something that will pull you towards a person. And most probably, if you experienced emotional, unavailable parents or caretakers that took over the parental roles, and maybe you used to feel lonely, you used to feel like there's something wrong with you, not accepted, you don't belong, that is familiar to your system. So that there is a level of emotional unavailability that then we seek without realizing as adults in other people in our lives, especially romantic partners. The other side of it is also true for someone who's avoidant. Someone who's avoidant most probably has felt suffocated, has felt trapped. That's a big fear of someone who's avoidantly attached. So most likely, because there is this what's familiar to the avoidant system most probably is that love is unsafe, right? So they will seek subconsciously partners. They will keep on perpetuating what they already believe about themselves and about love. That maybe love is unsafe. I will lose my freedom. That deep down, most people that are avoidantly attached are scared to be seen, because as kids, most of the time, when they were really seen in their vulnerability, crying, asking for their needs to be met, they were rejected for it. So they build a level of armor up that don't let people get close. That's why they're not mean. They are showing up with the same fear deep down, but in a different costume. So the same way as a lot of people that are anxiously attached are scared to be rejected, and that comes across more vulnerable than someone that has their walls up and is pushing them away, right? But we need to have compassion also for the people that are avoidantly attached, because they're still coming from the same struggle, and being anxiously attached is not healthy still. So they're both unhealthy. They show up in a different way. Sometimes the avoidantly attached will come across more distant, less available, but anxiously attached is not available still, because anxiously attached is when we are abandoning ourselves and trying to avoid being abandoned by someone else. And that is a big responsibility that we give to others, because then we're making them responsible for our well-being, and that feels like too much for someone's nervous system. So that is very important to keep in mind. And again, what is familiar for our nervous system, we will keep on looking for it. So in the sense of safe, the way that our body perceives safety is by what is familiar, not by what is good or bad, not by what is healthy or unhealthy, but it is by what is familiar. So therefore, if what is familiar for me, for example, is to be around, I'm just making this up, is to be around, for example, a father who is unavailable, who is moody, who wasn't there, then most likely I will look for partners that will keep on reaffirming and bringing up the same emotions, the same cycles, the same patterns of me maybe trying to chase, trying to prove myself, overgiving, becoming a people pleaser, molding myself into what my father, for example, needed. And I'll do that with a romantic partner. So it's always that our body is looking for familiar, and it perceives it as safe, even if it's the opposite of safe, right? Because we are sabotaging love potentially and hurting ourselves and other people in the process. You are on mute.
This is so true. Like when I heard you show us this example, so first of all, I want to start off with by mentioning that I remember in one of our sessions, you told me, "What are you fearing, Nick?" And I told you, "I'm fearing abandonment, Antea." And you told me, "Abandonment from who?" And it was my partner back then. And you told me, "Okay, but in what ways are you abandoning yourself?" And I remember when you gave me that question, it all made sense, that the fear of abandonment, that we fear that we're going to be abandoned by someone, but in reality, we're abandoning ourselves, either because we're rejecting connection if we're in the avoidant phase, or it's because we're abandoning ourselves if we're anxiously attached because we're doing so much for the other person. And also when you were mentioning the example, I realized that the dynamic with my mom in my life was that she was coming and going. I was always crying for her. So in the beginning, I was attracting partners who we co-created the same love dynamic I had with my mom. Then I started healing my mother wound with you. And all of a sudden, I started attracting people who made me feel suffocated and controlled, like the wound that I had with my caretaker, like the relationship I had with my caretaker, which was not my mom. So it's so true what you're saying, that we keep on co-creating what's familiar, literally. And before we sit down with ourselves and actually take responsibility for what we're doing, we can keep on pointing fingers as much as we want. I've done that after there was a pattern in my relationships, and I was like, okay, but what's the common denominator here? I can't be meeting the same person in a different face and body. So what's happening here? And that's when you start getting your answers. So once again, I'm sure everyone is going to get so much out of this episode. However, this is the main thing I really wish that people, like, whilst listening to Antea talking, like, we all have our own wounds, our own traumas. And even when we think that we don't have traumas, can the little trauma, Antea, can it make, like, our attachment in romantic relationships, especially, to lean more towards the insecure rather than secure?
So first of all, I love that reflection, and the abandonment part where we abandon ourselves. This happens a lot with anxiously attached individuals, and I see this a lot because most of the clients I work with are anxiously attached. And this is such a good reflection, because before we shift what is safe to our nervous system, to our body, to our system, literally, to that is maybe a stable relationship, a stable love that is reciprocated, not just one-sided, love that I don't need to prove myself or try to chase or convince. When we do that, we are then shifting what is familiar in our body. It doesn't happen overnight, but it is so important that we do that, because again, our body doesn't know the difference, what's healthy, unhealthy, what's good and bad. It only knows familiar. So I love that you shared that example. And I, take off my hat to you, because I've known you for such a long time. For those that are listening, Nicole and I used to also be friends throughout our childhood, you can say, and when we were teenagers. So we've seen each other's journey for such a long time, and we've been working together as clients as well, being my client for a while now. And one thing that I admire about you a lot is how much you're willing to look at yourself and to reflect on your side of the street, and to not to give up, even though you've been through so many hardships in life. And that's what makes you also a great coach as well, because you're able to meet yourself through that depth, which allows you to also be able to meet your clients there too. But that's so important that we reflect and we take a step back, and that we don't just point finger at the other person, because most of the time we're also playing a part in this dynamic as well. So that is so important. And with the question that you asked me, which is sort of like the little trauma and the big trauma, the way I see it is when we experience developmental trauma, which is, for example, right, versus complex trauma. Complex trauma is more when we are experiencing something that creates post-traumatic stress disorder, where it's sudden, where it creates a big shock in the system. For example, you see a loved one dying, or when you go to war, or you experience a big car crash. So that is going to be like the big trauma, right? Where anything around sound, anything around smell will trigger that. But a lot of us maybe haven't had these big events, but have had more little events that have still created trauma. But the thing is, this is why I don't like to use little trauma and big trauma, because as an adult, maybe looking back at what has been traumatic for a 3-year-old self, now I might see it as little trauma because it doesn't seem big in my eyes as an adult. But as a kid, it might have been really big for you, right? In this sense, it's important that when we hear little trauma or big trauma, because this is how it is out there, that we don't minimize the experience, especially if things you experienced as a child, because you might be seeing it differently now. Right now, it might seem irrelevant, but when you were a kid, it might have been your entire existence. So, but definitely having gone through, for example, experiences of rejection, right? As a kid, maybe not feeling maybe abandoned or rejected by your parents or your caretakers, those are going to be the biggest ones, because as kids, especially as babies, where our attachment style is being formed, usually we didn't feel the safety and closeness that we needed. So, for example, when we were emotional and we needed to be held, we were maybe felt rejected or left to deal with that by ourselves instead of having someone there, an adult, to co-regulate with us, which is through their regulated nervous system. They're there with us to help regulate our nervous system, which as kids, we're usually having tantrums. Our emotions are all over the place because that's the place where we are operating from the most, because the logical part of our brain is still yet to develop. So therefore we can't reason things out. We're gonna cry it out instead and scream and shout, right? So it doesn't mean that a parent had to be perfect in order for us to feel safe, because no parent is. But even little events that seem little in our eyes could have been feeling like the world is gonna end for a child. So yes, when we're having these increments of experiences that might not seem so big for us, that could have still created trauma that impacts also the attachment style and makes that attachment style insecure and creates this abandonment wound and fear to experience abandonment. Because as a child, if you throw me in the middle of the street, I'll figure it out as a 30-year-old, right? I'll find a way. But as a kid, if a kid didn't, especially a baby, right, is put in the middle of the streets, they won't survive, because we needed the adults. And when we didn't feel supported by the adults as much as we needed to, and this doesn't, we're, by saying this, by the way, I'm not blaming the parents entirely, because your parents might have showed up, or the caretakers might have showed up in the best of their ability, in the best way they knew, in the way that they used to parent back in the days. Few generations ago, there was a method which is called the Ferberizer method, where they used to let kids cry it out. And that was trending at the time, and a lot of parents used to do that. The intention was good. They thought that they were raising an independent baby, but they were actually raising an insecurely attached baby, right, or kid. So it's not to blame the parents or to make them, oh, this is your fault. In some cases, yes, there was negligence. There are cases where there was real negligence, but oftentimes the intention is good. It's just that they couldn't show up in the way we needed them to. And maybe they had their own trauma happening, or they had their own issues that they couldn't be there for us or be emotionally available for us growing up, especially in the infant stage between baby and being an infant. So that is what I would say in regards to that. But with my ADHD, I tend to go off tangent. So I'm just curious, did I answer your question or did I go off track? Because I'm not sure
No,
anymore.
Definitely, you answered the question. And I'm so glad you mentioned this and you explained it so well, because I share my story online very often to help others who are feeling helpless, hopeless, depressed, and despair to realize, like, listen, there is the hope, there's the possibility of me healing as well, of me becoming the version I wanted to be before all the trauma happened. And then what happens is sometimes I get people signing up to my coaching program, or even a friend recently, and they told me, or let me talk about this particular interaction I had recently with a friend, where she has a mom and a dad both together, they're present, and she told me, I don't understand why I am reacting and acting the same way you did 6 years ago, because my mom was not a drug addict. My dad is living with us. He's not absent from my life. So I don't understand how I show the same signs of avoidance, insecurity, anxiety, depression. And you just answered that, because basically when we are kids, obviously if there's like huge trauma, it's going to affect in many ways and forms. But if your mom decides to take your sister to the supermarket because your sister is way more naughtier than you are, and she decides to leave you with your dad, for example, she does that because you're the quiet one and your dad can handle you. But when it comes to your sister, she's so naughty that your mom decided to take your sister to the supermarket, but all of a sudden as a kid you make it mean, my mom prefers my sister. She always prefers taking my sister around. There's something wrong with me. Why does my mom prefer my sister? So thank you so much for explaining that. And there's no big trauma or little trauma for the kid. If a kid is feeling rejected, if a kid is feeling not seen or shouted at or whatever. And exactly as you said, this is not to blame the parents, because parents can only meet us at the level that they've met themselves. And in the past, in other generations, healing was not out there as much. We're so lucky that we have so much information. Sometimes it tends to get a bit too much with all the information we have online, but we are lucky. We must admit that we are lucky. So the same way there's generational trauma, there's generational healing. So whoever is listening to this, both Antea and I managed to heal our insecure attachment. And of course, there's always, speaking on my end, always more to work on. There's always more to embody and to love more the negative parts of us. But there is hope, because in my personal journey, I used to think, when I started with you, Ante, I told you, like, I'm very skeptical. I know this is not going to work. Nothing worked for me, but I'm going to give it a shot, because what else is there to lose? And I remember you looking at me and telling me, this is going to work. This is going to work. So I want whoever is listening to know that there is hope. Antea was not special. I was not special. It's just putting in the work and doing the work with someone who really knows what they're doing. It can, and you can heal your anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, insecure attachment. Do you agree, Ante?
Percent, and I'm glad that you shared that, because going back to something else that you said, it is true. Nowadays there's so much information out there, and you can read and learn, and especially on attachment styles. You can learn all the attachment styles online. You can learn about what they are, the behaviors, and you can look up ChatGPT and all of these things, AI nowadays. On social media there's so much information, and of course some of it is not very accurate, I have to say, because nowadays there are so many content creators that aren't professionals around these subjects, that are just sharing anything that's trending or maybe their own experience. So just be also aware to which advice you follow, in the sense of, to make sure that if you're following certain advice that is coming from a professional, not just someone that creates content for the sake of it. Nothing against these people, because it's good to relate to people that went through the same thing, right? So they have their purpose, but also to differentiate between the two. But also, there's so much information out there that can be so overwhelming and overstimulating for your system, where you almost like shut down and you freeze. You don't know where to start or what to do. You have all this information, but okay, how do I get there, right? Or I know all this stuff, but nothing has changed. And this is why then it's important, because you can logic your way through, but logic is not going to heal the trauma and the wounds and the pain that is creating all of these things to come out from you, whether it's the behavior, the insecurities, right, the fears. So it's important to not just stay stuck with the information, because it can actually be an overload and makes you retreat more rather than work through your stuff. So there's a place for information, but usually it's the 0.5 step. Then there's so many other steps that come after that. And that is why it's important, especially to work with someone that is going to help you get there, that is going to take your hand and walk you through step by step, so you don't have to feel overwhelmed. You don't have to try to figure it out by yourself. And you're also working in a deep way that works with the root cause, not just learning things logically, because that is going to feel overwhelming, most probably. Having said that, what you also said after that about your friend, this is why your friend, and I'm sure there's so many people that relate to what she shared with you. And again, your case is different. It's not going to be someone that experiences it in everyday life, right? So people might be comparing themselves and asking, okay, but you've been through something so big. I haven't been through something big, but I still feel this way. And to anyone that has felt that way, that you don't understand why you feel the way that you feel, you don't understand why you react the way that you react, and you think that you're exaggerating, or you just can't get it. Have compassion for yourself, because you minimizing what you've experienced, even if you don't know what it is, but making it seem like I haven't been experienced pain, like, why do I feel this way? Always meet yourself with compassion, because at the end of the day, if this is coming up in your body, it's coming from somewhere. It's not coming from thin air. I always say, I know, you've heard me say this so many times, Nicole, when a reaction is hysterical, it is historical. It is coming from your past. And oftentimes from our childhood, because that is when our brain is developing in a certain way where we can easily pick up on things that how do I explain this in very simple ways without going on a tangent? Because our brain is developing, I can speak for hours on this topic and not stop. Because our brain is still developing, we are so susceptible and like sponges for our experiences. And because we don't have the logic to reason it out and say, as you said, oh, my mom went to the grocery store with my sister because she has to have her there. It's not because I have something less. It's not because I'm less. It's not because I'm rejected. And that is why at a young age, especially, we tend to internalize a lot, and we tend to make these experiences mean things about ourselves that aren't even true in the first place. And then we live the rest of our lives looking at ourselves and at other people, at romantic relationships through that lens too. That if my mom did that, it means that there's something wrong with me. It means that I'm not good enough. And then, we feel that way in relationships when we grow up, and we don't understand why. And you might not understand why yet, but the only thing you can do right now is to be curious and still have compassion to what's coming up instead of making it wrong. Because making it wrong is only going to bring shame, is only going to bring more disconnection from yourself. And the more disconnected you feel from yourself, the more you're going to look for that connection in other people, and most probably in your romantic relationship. And then what happens? You become more anxiously attached. You feel more anxious. You feel more scared to be rejected, and it becomes worse. So compassion for yourself, even if you don't understand exactly what's going on, where it comes from, what has happened, still imagine yourself as a little kid and have love and compassion for her, because it's still coming from a place of pain, right? So don't shame yourself for your experience, and be open to understanding instead of feeling like there's something wrong with you.
Thank you, Anthea. And I want to add something to this, because I'm sure there are listeners right now who are saying, okay, because we brought up again the example of the sisters and the supermarket. I'm sure there are people here saying, okay, but my mom actually does prefer my sister, or my mom actually does prefer my brother, for example. And it could be that it's true, again, but it doesn't mean that your mom prefers one of your siblings because there is something wrong with you. It means that it's just a reflection of your mother's wounds. Most oftentimes than not, when moms have issues with themselves, it becomes harder for them to connect with their daughters, and it's easier to connect with the sons because the sons remind them less of themselves. And same with the fathers. When the fathers are very wounded, it becomes harder for the dad to connect with the son rather than with the daughter. So if there's anyone here listening and you're saying, okay, but what Anthea and Nicole are saying does not apply to me, because actually my mom really prefers my sibling to me. Again, if this is the truth, it doesn't mean because there's something wrong with you. It means that this is just a reflection of your mother's wounds. If it's between a brother and a sister, it's easier to understand. If it's between two siblings of the same sex, so let's say two sisters, maybe it's harder to understand because you're like, okay, but we're both females. But still, maybe your characteristics, your traits, your character, and all your personality and all that you are, maybe you trigger your mom. Not because it's you that you trigger her, but maybe there are certain traits in you that she wished she had growing up. So then there's an element of her being more distant. Maybe your sister, for example, is more, she accepts everything. She doesn't rock the boat. She allows everything to pass by. And maybe it's easier for your mom to bond with her because your sister does not say anything, does not correct your mom. So to any listener who's listening right now to this episode, even if it's true that there is an issue with the mom and the dad, because sometimes there is, it still doesn't mean anything bad about you. It still doesn't mean anything about your worth. So I just wanted to add that because I see this happening so much, especially now that my niche is specifically inner child healing. You meet a lot of people who have siblings and this is happening. And something else I wanted to add with what you said, Anthea, like about the logic, and you can read as many self-help books you can read on AI. It's true. I came to you with a lot of logic. I came to you with a lot of awareness. Like I told you, Aunt, I know everything what I should be doing and I cannot do it. And that's when everything changed for me. That's when I trusted Anthea. She became my coach. She held me accountable. She saw me. She loved me. And I'm not saying this just because it's on this podcast with Anthea, but it's actually true. Anthea helped me go to the root cause with the awareness that I had with the logic. It felt even worse actually because I knew what I should be doing and I couldn't do it. And that's when Anthea stepped in. That's when Anthea held me. She helped me reparent my inner child. We've released trauma from the body through somatics that she's learned. So that is the difference between reading books. It's good to have the awareness, but if you want to heal, the awareness is not enough. And something about AI, it's funny. Last time I tried this experiment with me, it was me and my sister, we were using AI. So we pretended that I am the girlfriend and she's the boyfriend. I wrote my perspective, she wrote her perspective, but in a very similar way to what was happening. And ChatGPT told Yana that she was right, that she should walk away from me. And ChatGPT told me that I was right, that my partner was toxic. So yes, we need to be careful. Yeah. We need to trust in professionals to go in this deep journey because you need someone to hold you properly and to know what they're doing.
I always say this, like AI, like ChatGPT is like a people-pleasing bot. You know, it will tell you what you want to hear most of the time. So it's not going to, in certain situations, it's good to help you see outside of the box maybe, but oftentimes it's not going to give you the advice that you actually need, right? It will give you the advice that will help you feel comfortable in a way.
That you want to hear.
Exactly. And I don't want to keep on adding up, but one thing that you shared around, you know, like what if my parents are really not, what if they hate me, what if they're unfair with me? You might have a really bad relationship with your parents or with a parent or with a caretaker, and that is very valid. And whatever your situation is, whether you have a good relationship with your parents, whether you have a bad relationship, whether you have a non-existent relationship, at the end of the day, all of this is still impacting the way you view yourself in relationships. It's still impacting your self-worth. It's still impacting how you show up, how insecure you feel, how secure you feel. So in whatever the background of your relationship with your parents or caretakers, it's still important to do the healing because either way, it has impacted you and you're still being what's the word I'm looking for? You're still almost like enslaved by it, because whether you know it or not, you are operating in your relationships from that little girl, or from those experiences, or from what your childhood or early childhood has made you believe about yourself or about love. So this is why I really say this. It doesn't matter, because we can still heal the relationship with the parents in the sense of how it impacted you, even if you don't have contact with your parents. But if you do have a good relationship with your parents, it doesn't mean that you have to not have a good relationship with them anymore just because you do somatic healing or inner child healing, because both can exist at the same time.
Thank you, Anthea. Naħseb person, Anthea, how would you describe, like, if we had to live a day in the life of an anxiously attached person, how would that day look like for them?
So it will vary from one person to the other, but something that I see very often and very commonly is that it's almost like when your emotions respond to relationship uncertainty, as if you almost feel like there's like a fire alarm in your body. It's almost like you get this signal of danger in a way. So when you feel any type of maybe silence or space, even if, for example, let's say you're dating someone and he's busy at work and he doesn't reply quickly, right? And you start overthinking. Did I say something wrong? Did he meet someone else? Is he talking to someone else? Did I overshare? Did I push him away? And you start immediately assuming you're being rejected and making it your fault on some level, right? So it's anything that is related to maybe silence or mixed signals, you will feel panicked, most probably. Start overthinking, blaming yourself, and maybe even some things that could happen. For example, you might be out with, I don't know, a date, a boyfriend, your husband, whatever, and he's looking around and you immediately assume that he's looking at other women. Most probably you'll be scanning the environment around you to see if there are women that in your eyes are attractive. And again, this might all be happening in your head. I'm not saying that this never happens in real life, but all of these things, we could be jumping onto conclusion when you're anxiously attached. So maybe in some ways, you might be maybe rereading conversations that you've had and try not to message immediately so you don't look clingy, but deep down you are anxious, you are panicking, you can't focus on anything else but to think of him, what he might be doing, what he might be thinking, if he's fed up of you, maybe even to see it also from a place of how it would look like. Maybe you constantly check if your stories was viewed by this person, if they're having a bad day or their tone changes a little bit, you immediately start being scared that he's rejecting you, or you start panicking, right? You easily over apologize, being people pleasing, over giving. That usually also goes hand in hand with anxious attachment, because I'm going to do anything in my power to keep this person in my life and to make them stay, and not to have them reject me or leave, right? So it's very easy for you to lose yourself in relationships when you're anxiously attached, and you start making the other person more important than you. You forget about the things that you enjoy or what you prefer, and you keep on adapting to the person, not because the other person necessarily wants you to, but it's because you're trying to do anything in your power to not experience rejection or experiencing abandonment, right?
Mhm.
So, and a lot of things, that the main thing is going to be you jumping into conclusions, you panicking, you feeling anxious, and you just laughing, you almost like having this catastrophic assumptions in your head of things that might be happening, even if you don't have proof in front of you, right? And you're maybe even afraid to share your feelings, to bring up certain concerns, because you're scared to push him away, for example. So you might be creating imaginary scenarios in your head. Again, maybe he's a little bit down for some reason. Maybe this day reminds him of someone that died and he's down. You feel responsible for his feelings, and you start wanting to make it better and try to fix and try to make sure he's not mad at you and that you're not the cause of him being mad. Or maybe, you keep on feeling almost unsettled until he comes back to behaving normally, right? You make it your problem and you make it your fault almost. Over explaining, trying to prove your worth, trying to be chosen, dramatically changing yourself to match what he wants. There are many different things. You can be stalking their social media, comparing yourself to other women that I've mentioned earlier as well. So there's a lot of this, but the main thing is that you are constantly scared to be rejected, to be left, and you are abandoning yourself in the process, which can look like, when I say abandoning yourself, it sounds like such a big term, but abandoning yourself is, for example, you are rejecting yourself by not telling him how you truly feel about something because you're so scared of him rejecting you by you telling him. So you are depriving yourself from that opportunity, for example, from sharing what you feel or sharing a particular insecurity or how something makes you feel or a preference, because you're scared that he'll reject you. It's almost like you're doing to yourself what you're trying to avoid that he will do to you. And that is such a like a main one. So one thing to look out for if you find yourself being anxiously attached, let's start with dating. When you're dating, you can easily find yourself being in fantasy world, jumping into relationships quickly, getting attached very quickly, anxiety around texting, fear of being too much. So if you find yourself rushing the beginning process or attracting a lot of love bombers and then you get disappointed, or sometimes maybe you love bomb people as well. That is something to be aware of. When you are in a committed relationship, something to be aware of is emotional dependence, right? So there's this codependency that happens when we're anxiously attached, where there's the opposite, which is when I'm hyper independent, which I'll do everything by myself, which is more of the avoidant. Then there is the interdependence, where I allow someone to take care of me, but I can also take care of myself. That is the healthy. Now there's the codependency, where I'm making the other person, I'm completely dependent on them. It doesn't have to be financially, but it would be emotionally, right? Most probably in relationships, you'll have a fear of conflict, fear of rocking the boat, jealousy, overthinking small cues, needing reassurance to feel okay, to feel safe, to feel grounded. So those are really things that to be aware of. And maybe you might even have some thoughts sometimes, I don't want to seem needy, so I shouldn't say this, or did I push him away? Did I do something wrong? Does he still like me? Does he still want me? All of these things. So those are all things that tend to come up with anxious attachment. And there's more, but I feel like those are the main ones.
Yes, and thank you, Anthea. And also, hearing you speak about all of this, given that I used to be the anxious one in relationships sometimes, and then I had people who were anxiously attached to me, hearing you mention all of this, when I was anxiously attached, I used to think to myself like, oh my God, couldn't he have just sent me a message saying that he's so busy? But then when it happened to me, when there was other people who were anxiously attached to me, and I was going about my day from one meeting to the next, and I just quickly went on my phone because there was an urgent message from my sister, for example. And then the person saw you online, and then you're out of the meeting and you find like 10 messages telling you like you could have replied, you were online. When I experienced both feeling angry at the other person because I was anxiously attached, I was hurting, and both having someone anxiously attached to me, when I was anxiously attached, it hurt a lot. And as you were saying, the fire that you feel in your body, sometimes you can't even eat, you're nauseous and you're sad, you can't move until they reply to you. So it's really sad. Yes, anyone who's experiencing this right now, go to Anthea. She will help you a lot with this anxious attachment, genuinely. I used to think that if I heal my anxious attachment, I'm not going to be as in love as I used to be, but it's not true. It's a much more peaceful way to live and to enjoy the benefits of a healthy relationship rather than just being super anxiously attached. Whereas when I was the one who was dealing with people who are anxiously attached to me, it made me feel so angry at them, and I really did not want to show up. I knew what they were experiencing because I experienced it too. And in the beginning, I could understand, be kind and compassionate towards their experience, but when it kept on happening, I felt so suffocated, I felt so angry, I felt so dysregulated that I just felt anger towards the person. So why am I mentioning this? I'm mentioning this because I understand both sides now, both the anxious and the avoidant, and both experience a lot of hurt and a lot of pain when they are stuck in this dynamic. So whoever's listening this, go heal your inner child, go heal your body through somatic practices. We have a somatic therapist here with us, and I am an inner child healer. So genuinely go and heal the root cause, because the avoidant anxious cycle is the most toxic. It is the most draining thing I've ever lived in. And it will not heal just because you find a new partner. Yes, the dynamic can be different, it's true. But unless, if you have these beliefs about yourself that you're not good enough, that you will be abandoned, you're going to keep on attracting the same partner, but in a different face, in a different body. So yes. Antea, I wanted to ask you something a little bit more personal. So you mentioned earlier that you used to be anxiously attached. You were both anxious and avoidant, but like mainly anxiously attached. So how did anxious attachment show up in your life, like in your romantic relationships especially?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for asking that. And reversing a little bit back to me growing up, I've always had this fear of not being good enough because of my body, because I've been rejected so many times by my family, by boys growing up, even being a teenager. I had such a big journey myself. There were times where for I would say around 7 years where I had addiction with alcohol and I had a lot of issues around that. For 8 years, I was also had an eating disorder and body dysmorphia. And one thing that I've experienced over and over and over and over again was relationships where I feel like I'm not good enough because of my body. Right. And again, this could be anything for anyone, but usually we use our insecurities as why we're not good enough in relationships, right? So for someone else, it might not be your body, it might be something else, right? I am too much, or if they get to know me, they'll see how broken I am and they would leave. We'll have different ones and we can have them all at once as well. But for me, I have experienced that a lot. And yes, there were times where I was avoidantly attached, where the first boyfriend I ever had, when he grabbed my hand for the first time, because I had such a big fear of intimacy and closeness at the time, and to have someone get close to me because I was so scared to be rejected. So I was used to pushing people away. And I was around 20 at this time. My first boyfriend, he grabbed my hand and my body reaction was to remove it, and I panicked. And he looked at me like, what's wrong? But my body rejected even just someone holding my hand, because I wasn't used to someone treating me with that softness and that kindness, and nothing big, it's just a handhold. But even that used to be too much for me at the time. So I never knew how to be vulnerable. I used to really struggle to open up. I used to be constantly sarcastic and making jokes. And then I started to work on my vulnerability, right? And then it all came out, all the vulnerability, all the insecurities, all the pain from the past. And my anxious attachment started coming out even stronger at this time, where um where I was really giving my power away in relationships and making the guy responsible for being there for me constantly or making me feel loved all the time. And it used to come up in various ways, but constantly I used to really compare myself to other women. And in my case, it was a lot around body image, right? So I used to compare myself a lot to other women's bodies and constantly tell myself that why would he want me? Why would he want someone that looks like me? He would prefer someone else. I'm not good enough. I will be left. I'm always rejected. And I've had a couple of experiences where I was dating someone or a relationship where they left abruptly and they shocked me. This happened twice, which they were quite big that I've experienced. And when I've experienced those, two in particular, I remember literally felt like I was dying from the inside. Literally. Looking back at the relationships, these two in particular that I've experienced, I was constantly hyper vigilating, hyper focusing on their behavior. If they look at someone's profile on their phone, if they mention a girl's name, I immediately assume they want her instead of me. If they are stressed out and they're not in the mood to be intimate, I used to say they're not attracted to me, I'm too much, I push them away, for example. So it came up in all the ways that I've shared earlier today as well. So I see a lot of my old self in my clients too when I'm working with them. That's why I really am able to understand them because I've experienced it all. But it really came up for me mostly from a place of I am too much, I will be left, my body is not desirable. And I was constantly looking for proof that that was true. So when I was with someone that would compliment me and accept me for being me, I used to doubt it. I used to not believe it. And then if I was with someone and they made the slightest comment, around, I don't know, maybe that they don't like something, for example, I used to then take it in and really get obsessed about it and spend even years thinking about one single comment, right? So yeah, it came up in many ways, but thankfully nowadays that's not the case anymore. I came such a long way with this. Of course, this is why I do what I do and why I'm so passionate about it. But as you've said, it is very draining when you're in either of the cycles because you keep on experiencing the pain that you're really trying to run away from at the end of the day.
Yeah. Thank you, Anthea. Thank you for sharing your personal story. And of course, if I'm going to ask you how your healing journey looked like, it's going to be a very long one. But from what you've learned from your own healing journey, I know that you constantly, like, you keep on studying, you give us the best service ever, like with, I've been with you for a long time now, and you're always coming up with new ways and new meditations, new visualizations, new exercises. Like, it's always so exciting. What would healing, if there's someone who's anxiously attached today listening to us and they've heard all of this and they're like, oh my God, this is me. I'm finally ready to heal this, basically. What would healing their anxious attachment look like? What would you suggest? Where should they start from? And what would it look like for them, the process, like internally?
100%. So when I created, for example, the program Secure, and I also take my one-on-one clients through a similar journey, I took out everything that has helped me personally. And through working with clients for 6 years, I saw what worked, what didn't work through my own experience first, and then what worked the most with my clients. So I created a method, which is the inner security method, where there are 3 phases, and this is what I would really suggest. So if you are doing this right now by yourself, the first thing I would say to start with is notice your behaviors. And when you are, let's say, dating or in a relationship, start with um, trying to find ways how you can make yourself happier. That is where I would start. Is, for example, if I am waiting on the phone, waiting for him to reply, waiting for him to message me and I'm panicking, in that moment, what am I wanting from him? Maybe that's attention, maybe that's love, validation. Okay, how can I do something that will help me feel that way even before he messages me? That is where I would start, and start becoming curious to your behaviors and understanding where it's coming from, if it's linked something from your childhood, or if certain things trigger you, what situations trigger you, because this awareness is going to be helpful. But I'm going to be honest, it doesn't happen overnight. And I would highly recommend that you would work with someone that would take you on the journey. So I'll explain the journey that I usually take my clients on, because I feel like it's important to break it down and for them to understand too. So the first step where I take my clients usually is to go through a phase which is called awareness. And this is where we break down all the behaviors, all the patterns of anxious attachment, where it's linked from, where it's coming from. So you have literally a map in front of you, a full picture of what's happening, what's impacted by your anxious attachment, where it's coming from, and how we can shift that from a more behavioral standpoint, right? What you can do instead of, for example, send a longer message asking for reassurance or getting angry and getting reactive. What can you do in that case instead? So like this, you have all the awareness you need, because awareness is very important. And oftentimes, even if you learned a lot online, for example, or reading, you might know the concept, but you might not have made the link with your own personal life. So usually there's so much to unpack here, even if you're aware already. The second phase is the healing phase, which is personally one of the most important phases. And this is where we do both inner child healing, especially around the early stages, right? Even around birth and around the first 2 years, but also what happens after that. And in the healing phase, we will be working with both inner child healing and somatic therapy, where we are able to use the body. This is why when we're anxiously attached, right, you feel a lot of emotions, you feel a lot of sensations, and you feel like you are reacting out of them, and it's almost like you can't sit down. You're constantly checking your phone. This is why it's important that we tune into the body and we work on regulating your nervous system when you're in these moments, healing any trauma or pain that is coming from the past through also somatic therapy. And it will help you to, when you're feeling those big sensations, big emotions, to know what you need to do to calm yourself down and come back to being grounded and feeling secure. So through this phase, we're helping yourself to learn to regulate, right? Instead of wanting someone else to regulate you by reassuring you, giving you validation, etc., but to also work on the deep root, which is usually the trauma, the fear of abandonment. So we go quite deep in this. And then the third phase, which I feel like is the second most important, this is so important that a lot of people tend to skip, which is the embodiment phase. And the embodiment phase is that we shift the anxious attachment identity to secure. And when we do this, what happens is that we start showing up, we start to learn, okay, so now I'm aware, I've healed my pain. And of course, don't get me wrong, healing is not going to be from this date till this date and that's it. You don't need to do anymore, but you will have the tools that you need to be able to use when these insecurities, these fear come up, and they will come up less and less and less over time. And then the third phase, which is the embodiment, is when we are then showing up as the secure woman, showing up as the woman that is secure, because now we've done, imagine that we had a room full of dirt, we cleaned it up, and now we can redecorate it. And that is the third phase, where we are then stepping in and showing up and doing these practices that will help us to become securely attached. So that is what I would say if I had to break it down into phases, because I think that is where most women get stuck, is they get stuck in understanding it logically. And that is definitely not enough. We need the other stages as well.
Thank you, Anthea. Such a great explanation, and I fully agree with you. And yes, the inner child, the somatics, the embodiment, everything is so important. And of course, the awareness and the link to how this attachment links to us, and not just to understand what this attachment is. So thank you so much for that, Anthea. If someone that's listening to us right now is feeling hopeless, what would you say to them?
I would say that at the end of the day, you're not alone in feeling hopeless. People that are where you want to be have also felt hopeless. And feeling hopeless is a part of the journey. It's not the end of the road. So what I would say is, if you feel like you can't lift yourself up, hire someone to help you. Because again, the hope you don't have right now, maybe someone else can instill it in you. And whether you decide to work on this professionally or not, remember that your mind will try to convince you that you're alone in your experience, but you're not. And that there is hope, but it doesn't happen by itself. You need to show up for it, and it will be worth it. Because most of us try to avoid doing the work, right? Because we feel like, oh, it's painful. I don't want to go there. If I put my finger on the stove, I'm going to burn my finger. But realistically, you're walking around with a flame all over you. So what I'm trying to say is, yes, in the moment, it might feel scary or uncomfortable to do this work to heal, but it's like you are carrying a 50-kilo rock on your back, and because it's hard to lift it up and throw it away, you decide to live your whole life with a 50-kilo rock on your back. It's more painful, right? It's more painful to carry it rather than to let go of it and to release it. So that is what I would say. And you're not alone, and this is not the end of the road. Yeah,
I agree with you. I remember, again, I'll mention it, but I remember it so clearly. I was so desperate, Anthea, when I was on the discovery call with you. And Anthea, guys, Anthea, as she mentioned earlier, we were childhood friends. So, and we were good friends, not like we were really good friends. So I trusted this person, and I knew that she would not tell me that something is going to work unless it really is going to work. But for some reason, it wasn't that I didn't trust Anthea. For some reason, I didn't trust myself. Like, this is how I always felt in my life. This is not possible for me. I was destined to go through pain. I was brought in this world just to feel sadness, fear, anxiety. But as I said earlier, I started with Anthea just because it was genuinely like my last resort. It was my last hope. I had tried all the therapy methods under the sun. I was on antidepressants for a short while and nothing was working. So I said, okay, I'm going to sign up with Anthea. I'm going to give it one last shot. If this doesn't work, I don't know what's going to happen with me. Just after the first session, when Anthea introduced me to my inner child, in that moment was where everything shifted from hopelessness to, oh my God, I had more than 1% of faith. I can't lie, but even that 1% of faith is huge in your journey, because we know how sad it is to be where you are right now. Both Ante and I were in the same space that you are currently at right now, and there is hope for you. So we hope that this episode helps you shift all the hopelessness that you're feeling to feeling hope, that there's hope for you too. And right now we know that your brain is trying to tell you, but they're lucky, they're special, something happened to them that made them, so they were friends, that's why they managed. I was not part of Antea's healing journey. She's done it with other people who weren't her friends. So stop allowing your brain to continue tricking you into believing that healing is not possible for you, because it is. Tell them, Antea.
No,
Tell them
100%.
it is.
I agree. And it was actually the opposite. At first, I was more hesitant because you were a friend of mine, and I wanted to make sure that we'll have like a good professional relationship that doesn't get impacted. So I would say that would have been more of a difficulty in that sense, but it actually worked great. But definitely, I agree with you. And this is what I would say, right? It's if you do feel hopeless, if you do feel like nothing is working for you, just keep the door slightly open, because first of all, you know what you know, but you don't know what you don't know. So by staying a little bit open, your mind will tell you tried everything, but most probably you haven't tried everything, right? And even being open to other ways and other methods that you might have not explored. You might have been going to therapy or psychotherapy, which has its own time and place, but maybe that was going to take you from A to C, and then to go from C to Z, you might need something else, and that's also okay. So just stay open and don't limit yourself, because the more you limit yourself with what's possible for you, the less you're going to allow yourself to be open to healing.
Thank you. Antea, where can people find you?
So you can find me both on Instagram and also on Facebook. I recently started using TikTok, but I'm very new there. I'm still learning and navigating. So you can find me on Instagram at Anthea Spiteri, and I'm sure we'll leave the link somewhere down here as well. And yeah, you can connect with me there. You can even send me a private message if you want to, or just follow me and follow along my content. And I'll be more than happy to connect.
Nice. Do you have any resources, free resources that you have to help anyone who wants to get started on this journey?
100%. So one thing that you can go and download immediately as well, if you go through my Instagram or Facebook, which will have the links somewhere down here, you can go there and go download a free practice called The Chosen Woman. And the Chosen Woman meditation is going to help you to start embodying that identity. It will give you the first push that you need. You might get emotional doing it. You might feel empowered doing it. You might feel both, but highly recommend to go and do it, and then message me and let me know how that went. And also, and this is only for the podcast listeners, that's why it's not going to be in the link of my bio, but if you come and just share and say heal out loud in my DMs, then I will send you a somatic practice that will be available for you for a week. And this is for anxious attachment, so it will help you to process any emotions that are heavy for you around the subject and moving through these emotions as well.
Thank you so much, Antea. Thank you. And do you have anything exciting coming up?
Yes, 100%. So we are finishing soon the round of Secure program, which I am running right now next month. So in the beginning of next year, we don't have the date yet, so I'm not going to share it because I'm not 100% sure which date. But the beginning of next year, we're going to be running another round of Secure program, which is 3 months long. And the purpose of this program is to go from being anxiously attached to secure. So if you're interested, you can either reach out right now, and you can have an early bird access as well. You'll get bonuses when you join earlier. And there's also one spot open right now for my one-on-one program as well, which is depending on what the person needs. So sometimes it's 3 months, 6 months, depends on what the person needs.
Amazing. For whoever is listening and you heard Anthea mention group coaching, I just want to add something to this group coaching because we're so used to one-on-one. And when Anthea introduced me to group coaching, I was like, no, Anthea, I want one-on-one. I prefer to just talk with you. These things are personal, blah, blah, blah. But then I entered her group coaching program and it was insane the amount of love that I felt in that group because there were other women who are going through the same thing. It was still very personal. It was still very private. Anthea makes sure that everyone is following the rules. And also, like, I still have friends from that group coaching. And when we're going through these periods in our lives, we tend to feel, as Anthea said earlier, that we're alone in what we're going through. And when you enter a group coaching program, you realize that you're not alone, that there are so many people who are actually feeling like you. And when you're in that, something about anxiously attached people, something I used to feel is that we tend to feel that, like you said earlier, we put our eggs all in one basket. Having a group, being a part of a group, it's going to help you feel that you're getting happiness outside of the relationship, that you're getting love outside the relationship, that you're actually enjoying showing up to this. Like, you'll be waiting, at least I used to be waiting, you're like excited, waiting for the day to have the session with Anthea and her group. So this might be something new for some of the listeners. It might not be new for others, but from my own personal experience, I loved the group coaching program. It has a lot of benefits. So thank you, Anthea. Thank you for accepting this invitation to be on Heal Out Loud. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for sharing your personal story. I'm pretty sure that anyone who's anxiously attached, they're going to get a lot out of this episode. Thank you so much, Anthea. Thank you. If today's episode made you think, laugh, cry, or want to yell at the universe, good. That means something moved. Make sure you hit follow, share this with a friend who's healing too, and remember, you don't have to heal quietly anymore. See you next week for more truth bombs, breakthroughs, and a little bit of magic.